Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. I'm really excited about this conversation today because I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and Matt Tengtrakool is going to be joining us. He's the founder of GiveFront. And I'm telling you, if you're in the nonprofit sector, Matt, you've had to front money through your own credit cards, haven't you? I mean, this is like one of those things. It's just problematic all the way around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I love that you saw a need and that you've come up with a solution. And so this is going to be a lot of fun for us to have this conversation with you. You know, we get to have these conversations with folks like Matt each and every day. We're now up to almost 1,400 episodes. We're in our 6th year, and that's because we have presenting sponsors like Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and Fundraisers Friday. These folks are a big part of why we are able to move forward and have these amazing conversations. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, but you probably knew that. More importantly, Matt Tengtrakool is with us, founder of GiveFront. Okay, Matt, give me your elevator speech, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me again, Julia, and super excited to be here. But I'm Matt. I am the founder at GiveFront. We provide a credit card and spend management platform for nonprofits. My background, I come from the nonprofit space, have run 2 of my own organizations, and then worked at a bunch of different organizations as treasurer, as CFO, and I think that my background, both from the tech space and the running the finances of organizations, that like conflicts very, very much so. And then the tools that organizations use today, some of them were built, before I was born, and I think that that leads me to be very excited about being able to build kind of like modern financial tools for organizations, credit cards, spend management tools, helping organizations run more efficiently.
Mm-hmm. It's such a big deal because I feel like when you get it wrong, like for example, you don't get the right receipt or you whatever, there's a million things. I feel like it creates so much more of a burden and a time suck on an organization that might have been a transaction that was like $19.99, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like little amounts of money that add up to a lot of frustration. Anybody in the nonprofit sector knows this. They've lived this, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times they self-fund. They use their own financial resources and tools, and then have to wait to get reimbursed.
Yep. I mean, our goal is basically exactly to your point. One, trying to cut out as many reimbursements as possible. You want to be able to allow staff members, volunteers to spend for your organization, but you also want to, as an administrator, have controls and kind of like the financial oversight over exactly where everything is going. And then the second piece is like just what's so different about the space is that there are different workflows, there are different compliance endpoints. You have to not only just file your 990, you have to report back on where your grant has been spent out to. If you go through an audit, a financial review, there's so many different rules and regulations with kind of how you track your expenses. And so I think that like having a system set up from the start is like extremely important for organizations.
Yeah. You mentioned something and it just like kind of put my hair on fire. You mentioned volunteers. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah.
That's like a whole nother layer.
Yeah. I mean, you don't I'd say traditionally you don't want, your volunteer to have a credit card. But you can imagine, a lot of the cases where you have someone who needs to go to Costco and spend $100 on an event, supplies coming up.
Right.
But like, how do you do that today? I think that is something that, we really focus on, allowing organizations to, basically give ideally as many folks the ability to not have to go through the reimbursement cycle, but also do that in like a safe way.
I love it. Well, let's get into the whole concept a little deeper. And that is, how are you seeing staff use cards. I mean, it's no secret we're moving away from being a cash society into, a debit card, credit card, digital payment society. Are you seeing this with the nonprofit sector as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of most organizations that we talk to today have the Chase cards or Amex cards or Wells Fargo or local bank cards. I think we work mainly with kind of small to mid-sized organizations, so anywhere from one main staff member to maybe 50 plus, and so we do kind of span the gambit. But a lot of them just have one credit card for the organization that might be tied to a single person that is then handed around for different events or different programs. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of organizations today are using debit cards and credit cards, and still kind of integrating that into maybe their accounting systems and things of that sort.
Right. I mean, it's such a hard thing because it seems like all of our transactions have moved to a digital payment system. I mean, we haven't even really addressed phone and digital wallets, which is a whole nother thing. And so are you seeing the digital wallets being used more, or is that still more a personal, finance issue?
Yeah. I mean, that is one thing that we at GiveFront, you can basically spin up a virtual card and attach that to your Apple Wallet to start spending right away. I think that that's something that a lot of organizations today don't really do too much of. But again, this kind of comes back to the volunteer scenario of you want to get someone to spend, you can just assign a virtual card with $100 spend limit on it, and then provide it to the volunteer to add to their Apple Wallet, and they can run to Costco and get all the supplies that they need, rather than having to wait for a physical card to get shipped to them or things of that sort. And so I think that's something that more and more is, we think is going to be prevalent.
Yeah. And it's just so efficient in terms of, time savings, and then leading into this issue of tracking and transparency, which we'll talk about now. And that is when we have these people interfacing, basically spending our money and using our resources, where do we have the hiccups? I don't want to use the word problems necessarily, but non-compliance is another issue. And what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I feel like there are two, from my experience working at organizations, there are two major things. One are just audit preparation. It's you want to have all of your documentation, all your receipts for audits, but if you are an accountant for nonprofits, or if you're a treasurer for nonprofits, you understand that it's extremely hard to get all of your staff members to collect all their receipts and then store that for your own purposes. And so I think that's a big piece. And then secondly, it's just kind of having your internal controls or internal policies built out into how you are going about things. I think a lot of cases, organizations, for example, are spending every month, and at the end of the month are then okay, where does this this expense go to, which grant and which budget and which program? And one, that takes a lot of time, but two, that ideally should not be the process that you're taking, just because I think the better way that we think is you have your restrictions and your internal policies, and you build that out proactively. So ideally, when you're spending, exactly okay, we're spending from this grant and this budget, and then we can know that if we're running up on that grant or that budget, one, we understand that, and then two, you can kind of make better decisions about it, rather than at the end of the month having to decide, we actually overspent on this budget, and how do we then allocate some expenses to another one? I think that is a pretty complicated process that a lot of organizations that we work with go through.
Well, and I think you always think, well, I'm not going to forget what I spent at, to go back to Costco, or you think, oh yeah, this is going to be straightforward, I'm going to know. And then life gets busy, your organization's doing a lot, and the end of the month, you got to come back and try and recreate, as we were saying in the green room, a $19.99 spend, and try and figure that out. I got to believe you're not real accurate by the end of the month.
Yeah, I mean, it's like one, if you don't want to be worrying about, again, every single $10 charge for your organization, but it also is like, important for one, your peace of mind, but two, for budgeting and things. That's where these $10 charges add up, and you want to make sure that again, the right programs are being spent out of, and you can kind of track your budgets versus actuals. So that's, again, something you don't want to spend too much time on, but is important. And so kind of what we do.
So, one of the things I want to ask you about is you didn't lead with the F word or fraud. You led with compliance.
Yeah.
How much does fraud, not flawed, fraud or mismanagement factor into this?
Yeah, I think that's that's an important point of one, a lot of organizations moving on to digital payments, whether it's debit cards, credit cards, making sure that you have visibility over all the expenses that are going out, and that also, you, again, don't use one card that is shared and you have numbers shared to 10 people on your team. I think that a few things that we do to mitigate that. For example, you can, again, set up virtual cards on our platform. A lot of organizations do that to have, you can imagine maybe a recurring Zoom expense, just have a specific card for that Zoom expense only that is limited to, again, that $20 a month that you're spending. And so one, that helps with your budgeting, but two, that helps with making sure that that and only that is spent every month. And then also being able to, again, rotate out your cards very easily, and just, again, have a very high level overview of exactly all of the expenses that are going out. And so, that's a big part of what we do is one, kind of managing expense, the fraud level on our end, to allowing organizations to put restrictions, controls on their end, and also manage things like matching up receipts to transactions and making sure that that actually aligns. And so, again, this is all to give your organization, one, the peace of mind that everything is well in place, but two, also that you're staying in compliance or in your policies or abiding by your grant rules.
Right. We were just talking about this at a staff meeting the other day, and that was, it's shocking how much you have these little nitpicky monthly expenses, and you see $7.99, $9.99, $11.99, and you're just psychologically, you're just I don't know what that is, but it's got to be something. And I don't have the bandwidth to track all this down. And so you just let a little thing add up, and it's got to be a structure that is somewhat familiar, unfortunately, with a lot of nonprofits.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you are even if you're a one-man show, I think there's a lot to manage. If you are just an executive director running a small organization, maybe kind of everything that goes out, but once you have more than one staff member that is spending for the organization, I think that it gets harder and harder for you to ensure that you know exactly where every expense is coming from. And so what's important there, I think, is kind of, again, allowing everyone to have the ability to spend, but allowing them to also mark those expenses with the relevant context. Again, you can upload the receipt, you can tell them a quick memo of hey, this is for this program. You can assign that, you can ask them to assign it to a budget, and then basically the person who's spending knows the most about exactly where it should go. And then at the end of the month, whether you, again, are treasurer or you have a bookkeeper or accountant, that person can have all of the context that they need without having to bug them and be hey, what is this expense for? Where did this come from? It's just kind of transferring that, you have what in your mind over to your accountant, your bookkeeper, your treasurer type of thing.
Right. It's so interesting too. I've got to believe that there's a psychological factor that if you're being tracked or you are involved in the tracking process, you're probably a little bit more transparent or efficient or whatever, right? It's not like you're just task oriented. Oh, I got this done. Let's move on. You're more engaged in what that finance process is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, that's like for us, as simple as you know, please upload a receipt and like please tell us what budget this is from. But I think you can even think, much larger than that.
Interesting.
How do we allow staff members to build out their own, mini budgets and track those things and ideally, everyone, if you're spending, you're somewhat involved in the finance process, and at some point someone will ask you about what expense this was, and so you better it's better off to do that as you do it than having to pick your brain for it like 3 months down the line when an audit comes up.
Yeah, recreating a scenario is just the pits. And I think it's frustrating. And I also think that it's kind of one of those things that demonizes the relationships that you have with your finance department. Because a lot of times those people, are at loggerheads with the programming or whatever. And that, a lot of eye rolling going on. And you're like, if you're on the programmatic side, you're like, oh my God, I'm saving lives. Don't ask me about this stupid receipt. And then the finance person's like, oh my God, I'm trying to save the organization and keep them afloat, help me out. And it's like, it's just a fascinating I want to say relationship issue, right? I mean, there's nobody that hasn't worked in our space in the nonprofit sector that hasn't come upon this at some form or time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is our goal, the goal of most organizations should be to get every dollar through from what comes in from donations and grants all the way through their programs to whatever outcomes they can achieve. And I think a lot of times there's some conflict between what the finance department of your organization wants versus what maybe a program manager wants for their own budgets. And I think that another underrated piece of what we do is allowing kind of more transparency between those two things, where there's less of a push and a pull. And if you are a finance director, you can allow more visibility into exactly kind of budgets. And on the flip side, if you're a program manager, you are a bit more involved in being able to see where you guys are at in terms of those budgets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important. One of the things that is kind of a mystery to a lot of organizations, and I feel like some organizations get it really done well, and that's this whole issue of sales tax and sales tax refunds and tax exemptions. Can you talk to us about that and what you see going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the nice thing about us is that we only work with nonprofit organizations, and there's a lot of very unique kind of, whether it's tax laws, rules. I think the two main places that we help right now, for organizations in North Carolina and Utah, there's a structured sales tax refund process. And so, in many states, if you're a nonprofit, you can kind of get sales tax off at the point of sale. And so that's an important piece. And then in some states, like I mentioned, Utah and North Carolina, they have kind of a refund process. And a lot of the organizations that we talk to and that we work with there, it's just too much of a thing to deal with for them to be able to go about it. You don't want to collect every single, again, gas station receipt to then, bundle it all and kind of itemize it for your sales tax refund. In North Carolina, especially, it's pretty painful just because not only do you have to keep track of, every single expense, you have to then break it out by county that it's spent in. And so, it's way 100 maybe 100 lines, and then you got to break it out into different tax categories just to get maybe your few $100, $1,000 tax refund at the end of the year. The nice thing about kind of what we do is that, again, because we provide the cards to organizations, we can see kind of exactly the who, what, when, and where things were spent, and then we also ask you for those receipts. So what we do is at the end of every month, in Utah, at the end of every or semi-annually for organizations in North Carolina, we'll provide you with basically the pre-filled form. We'll break it down, by county, by tax code, and And then all you have to do is, and we'll also provide you with all the receipts, so that in case that they ask for that documentation, you can provide it, and all you have to do is basically print it out and mail it in. And so I think that's been like a pretty big deal for a lot of the organizations that we work in those two states.
Yeah. Well, pardon me. Think about it. You can easily be pushing 10% of your spend.
Yeah. I mean,
and that adds up.
Anywhere from like 7.5 to 10%, basically, and on practically all of your expenses. And so I think on one end, if you have to do it manually, it's pretty tedious. But if you can do that automatically, like that is like a no-brainer for a lot of organizations that we work with.
Yeah. So interesting. I got to believe too, Matt, that this is kind of one of those things that is not something that folks automatically think of, right? When they're out and about doing the business of the nonprofit, the amount of time to find the store manager and say, look, I'm a nonprofit. You should be able to take this off, all that. That's not easy. And it's arduous, and it can take so much time. I can see people are just like, screw it. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Just, let it go.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, a lot of, store managers don't have the experience of even like going through that process. And marking that down for organizations. And I think like maybe if you're an executive director or a treasurer, like that's something that is like extremely important and you'll do every time. But it's a hard thing to expect, all of your different staff members to do that. And so, being able to kind of track that on our platform and then, automatically, like basically a one-click refund, I think has been pretty exciting for us to build out.
You made me think of something I hadn't thought of for years. I mean, decades ago, I was at a local big box store buying underwear for a women's shelter. And it was sizable. It was like $1,000 worth of undergarments. And I went to the store manager and I'm like, look, I'm buying this underwear to donate to a shelter. I'm going to spend $1,000 and I can get a tax abatement. And I'll just roll that into an additional purchase. And he looked at me and he was like, you know what? This is such a hard thing to figure out. And I have to like go back on the back end. But I can give you a discount. And that's an easier thing to plug in. Yep. So I'm going to give you a 50% discount on everything you buy. So I was able to basically double my purchase, right?
Yeah.
And it was such an interesting thing because this guy wanted to do the right thing. He was honorable, but he couldn't mechanically go around the system to do that. So that was what his approach was. And 50% was a hell of a lot more than just the 8.65% or whatever the sales tax was.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these point of sale systems, it's not like it's just a simple like, oh, it's a nonprofit, let's just click this button type of thing. Like they have to just, go in and mark down the sales tax and then probably like, confirm it with their manager. And so it's definitely like a decent process. And I think that again, if you need to do it every single time, it is maybe like not enough of a savings for you to worry about. But then again, if you can do it every time without having to worry about it, then it's up to 10% back basically on all of your transactions. And so that's a lot of money for an organization to be saving and then deploying for programs.
Right. Well, and it's 10% you don't have to raise.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, it's like that works for me. Hey, as we wrap things up with you today, Matt, and this has been so interesting. I think there are no viewers out there that haven't been through this pain at some point or will be. And so I think this has been a great conversation. Talk to us about what you're seeing that are best practices that work for not only the nonprofit teams, but the finance teams. And we've already talked about some of those issues the dynamics of the two different teams. What do you see that are best practices?
Yeah, I think one important thing just generally, whether you look into what we do at GiveFront again or not, is looking into spend management platforms. Again, I think that it's really about building out or making your internal policies actionable, doing that proactively, not having to go through like really long, tedious end of month reconciliation. And again, you really want to know what grant budget is being spent out of as you spend out of it. So spend management platforms generally, you can build budgets and will help you, provide cards or spend tools to spend from that. I think that's probably, what I think about in my main advice for a lot of finance teams. And then other things are just, again, I think, generally really defining and making clear what those internal policies are with your staff members. Who can spend what where, like what tools do we use to spend from it? Like when do you use cards? When do you might want to use, just like maybe a direct bank transfer to pay someone. I think a lot of organizations, again, maybe a lot of treasurers as well, have this in their heads, and then there's a decent amount of back and forth between them and their staff members, and I think a lot of them have them as well in like high level in their bylaws. But I think just taking maybe a meeting to talk with your team about that and just going over again the best practices for all of these things are important. And I think last thing quickly is just about looking into some of these things like your sales tax exemptions, your like receipt collection processes, discounts that you can get on different softwares. I think that again, there are a lot of very niche rules when it comes to running a 501c, and these things are good to review on like maybe a yearly basis, just because things change so often. But yeah, I think those things would be my main advice.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of a policy, and I like the idea of a policy review. I think that, especially as you grow and you bring in new people or people, shuffle or leave, I think it's a really interesting thing to understand that this can be navigated, and it should be navigated, right? I mean, it's one of those things too, that when you report back to your stakeholders or, your board, you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing and you have the appearance of doing the right thing as well, right? Because that filters down to donor trust, and that the implications are so heavy on that. Well, Matt, you have been great. I've loved that you, it seemed to me, followed the journey of your own experience to figure out a new way and a different way to do things. Matt Tengtrakool, founder of GiveFront. You can go to GiveFront.com and learn about their work and their platform, how they navigate this process, what they think about. I feel, Matt, like when I was on your site, you brought up things I hadn't necessarily thought of. And I was like, oh yeah, duh, that makes sense, right? I mean, it was cool to understand kind of like what the journey should be for anybody that is going to be making spends. And, as we grow our organizations, this becomes more and more of a reality, right? So very interesting. You can't just think that you're going to go out there and do the work of the angels. You're going to have costs. You're going to have to buy things. So it's very, very interesting. So thank you for being here. It's been a lot of fun. We have amazing partners that join in our fun each and every day, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and Fundraisers Friday. These are the folks that join us day in and day out, so we can bring conversations like we've had with Matt to you today. Matt, we sign off every day with this different mantra, and today I'm thinking about financial health and the stress of relationships within our organizations. And the mantra goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, everyone.